All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. We'll have people filtering in, I'm sure, throughout. We have a good group. So, and my colleague, Michael Rushton, just told me that that's right, um, there's a Nesta webinar right now going on, so we might be short of our European contingent, but maybe not. So I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Giacomo Negro from Emory University. And Giacomo is today presenting a study on culture and innovation, a study of the popular music industry. So excited to hear this. You are a professor of organization management and sociology by courtesy, and also the associate dean for culture and inclusion at Emory University's Guizueta Business School. I think I said that correct, but I may have not. So I will just turn it over to Giacomo, and if you want to correct my pronunciation, that would be good too.
Thank you for having me. I think different people pronounce it in different ways, so I think everything is accepted. So yes, Giacomo Negro from Goizueta Business School. Thank you for inviting me to present my research in your workshop. I will be discussing ideas and findings from a research project that now includes multiple studies. I'll try to cover a couple of these studies. And the work is done in collaboration with Balazs Kovacs at Yale and Glenn Carroll at Stanford. I wanted to acknowledge my co-authors as well. The focus is on the popular music industry, particularly innovation in music production. One caveat as I start with the presentation, we use a specific interpretation meaning of innovation based on differentiation. You may disagree on this specific interpretation, and if you do, I ask you to focus on the line of argumentation, and perhaps and after the presentation, we'll be able to address some of these differences in interpretation. My presentation begins with a motivation for studying innovation in cultural production. Next, I will discuss the critical role in the research designed to study awards as conditions that allow to isolate, if not perfectly, at least better, some important ways in which innovation occurs and the impact that it might have on cultural production. I will then conclude with some implications and take questions from the audience as time allows. Feel free to interrupt me, although in Zoom it might be a little bit difficult to manage, but feel free to interrupt me with clarification questions. And if the question requires a more detailed response, I might ask to hold off to later the question or the response. There are two questions in this research project so far, which I present here before returning to the research information. The first one is that we examine careers of music artists after major awards to see whether winning artists, winners of awards, change the music they make and appear to experiment more after having been recognized with an award. The second question is that we also seek to understand better and more how the recognition that these artists receive might result in more exploration. And we use the word exploration to describe innovation and also artistic differentiation, which, as I will discuss a little bit later, means increasing distance from others, from other producers, other musicians, other artists in the same field. When it is studied, innovation in cultural production generally is more concerned about individual products and also explaining the success, so the impact that these individual innovative products have in the marketplace. Our interest is complementary but slightly distinct, which is more in understanding how innovation is produced in the first place. To be fair, there is a lot of research and growing research on creativity and creative production. For example, Frederick Godard and co-authors define creativity as producing something that audiences find unexpected. We see some clear parallel and relationship with that type of definition, although we also distinguish innovation from creativity in the sense that not all creativity is innovative, and not all of innovation entails creativity. For example, not all innovation is unexpected. Say, if you consider the new camera features of a mobile phone, they tend to be expected and not necessarily a surprise. And not all that is unexpected is also an act of imagination, innovation per se. So think about the role that chance can generate in cultural production, such as in the visual arts. We are interested in an explanation of innovation that considers content, but also context, contextual factors. One theoretical perspective that we find particularly useful to build on is field theory, mainly associated with the work of French sociologist and philosopher Pierre Bourdieu. I'll stress a couple of points here. One is Bourdieu thought of cultural production as a field of homologies or parallelisms or correspondences. Cultural producers compete in a space where they are positioned one in relation to the others. These relationships, these competitive relationships, are defined in terms of aesthetic features of the products that producers make. This implies that producers take positions in relation to one another through their products. This also implies that by examining products, one can examine the trajectory of careers of those who produce them. The picture that you see in this slide is the famous A Great Day in Harlem, a black and white photography of 57 jazz musicians in Harlem, New York, taken by photographer Art Kane for Esquire magazine in 1958. Among the many artists that maybe you cannot see very clearly, but this group of artists include Count Basie, Art Blakey, and Maxine Sullivan. This is just, I think, to illustrate this sort of field level perspective on cultural production. The second point that I want to stress is that producers also are in the field that they are in to seek recognition and accumulate a cultural capital. This is another important point drawn from Bourdieu's theory. Cultural capital gives producers some form of authority and power, and cultural capital can translate into economic capital. In general, more capital is better for the producer and is always better. So even when recognition is achieved, producers will seek more of it. And they seek more cultural capital, more recognition to make a name for themselves by competing and differentiating. These are sort of a couple of important general points. And this slide really stresses the importance of competitive processes as a contextual factor. The other important contextual factor is also collective production. A lot of the work, at least that we have reviewed in that analyzes cultural production, tends to focus on individualistic or individual production efforts, but clearly cultural production is collective, is both competitive, as I said just a slide earlier, but also collaborative. This slide reproduces Jason Toynbee's a radius of creativity that represents the idea that the artist lies at the center of a system of production that produces music and innovation. The artist assembles content elements, but the process also involves other collaborators and other organizational partners that are part of the aesthetic and technical decisions. The picture in this slide instead represents a group of musicians, including Jackson Browne, Joni Mitchell, and Cass Elliot, who was often the hostess of gatherings among multiple artists. So again, artists compete, but they also collaborate in ways that where their incentives, their motivations, their interests might be aligned and not necessarily in antagonism to one another. I'll shift now to discuss an important variable in these studies, so innovation as differentiation. Differentiation is akin to innovation, we think, in cultural production, because in this context, content is typically made once, and so doing something different often implies doing something novel. We examine innovation through the analysis of product features, as I'll discuss. That means music albums, which then allow to examine also positions of the artists in the cultural field over time. The process I described of positioning, of an artist positioning themselves in a cultural field vis-a-vis others is endogenous in the sense that of mutual causation between differentiation and recognition. Often artists are recognized for their innovative efforts, and they and also recognition might produce further differentiation. So we need some kind of, and this is tricky to complicated to study empirically. So we need some kind of exogenous or a semi-exogenous shock, a variation that allows to establish more clearly how innovation is made. We identified awards, symbolic rewards, as providing such a tool, both conceptually and methodologically, because awards tend to create some discontinuity between winners and finalists, often for the award on one hand and everyone else on the other. Awards tend to recognize excellence, past excellence, but are also supposed to incentivize future excellence. I mentioned that one of the main ideas that we draw on is the assumption that artists seek recognition in their field. Cultural production in field theory is conceptualized as being separated between autonomous and heteronomous fields. What does that mean? Autonomous fields are those in which the producers pursue art for art's sake goals and are evaluated mainly, if not exclusively, by peers, by other artists. And heteronomous fields instead, in which success or output is evaluated by distribution and consumption agents. That's the original idea in field theory. We think that in actuality, every field of cultural production tends to be a combination of both art for art's sake goals and commercial goals as well. The important thing, however, even if in each field artistic and commercial goals are intertwined, is that artistic aims tend to be seen as superior and also the best currency to transform cultural capital in economic capital. So artists will primarily seek recognition and seek accumulation of cultural capital through artistic aims rather than commercial ones. In the case of cultural production and the role of awards that create this continuity between winners and the others, the artistic mode of pursuing these art for art's sake goals becomes both an aspiration and an affordance, in the sense that the artist is interested and motivated to seek more recognition, but after having been acknowledged for their work, for their excellence in their work, the artist is also in a better position to negotiate their own terms with their organizational partners. And one way, for instance, to do that is to gain more direct control over the production process. The main idea behind the first study, at least, is that when artists receive awards, they will be pursuing more experimental work. They will engage in more artistic. They will pursue more artistic aims and will be ultimately more differentiated and more innovative than other artists. In the both studies, but I will cover the first one more in detail. We examined the Grammy Awards in popular music. The Grammys were established in 1959 and represent the most important honor in the field of popular music. There are four major general awards and many more specialized awards, and they're specialized typically by genre. We focus instead on the four general ones. The nomination process for these awards involves submissions from hundreds of professionals in the music industry. A screening committee of more than 150 experts reviews the submissions and, for example, determines whether the work is entered in the appropriate category, such as Best Pop Performance or Record of the Year. The voting members choose entries for award nominations, and the 5 entries that receive the most votes in each category constitute the final list. A subsequent round of balloting determines the winners in each category. We collected data on the nominees and winners of these 4 general awards across about 5 decades of data, and identified about 1,000 artists who were nominated at some point for one of these 4 awards. I stress that the Academy judges a record on the basis of artistry and artistry alone, and not sales and mass popularity. So commercial success is not the yardstick for the Grammy Awards. Yes, sorry, let me move on to the next slide. We used albums of artists over 5 decades of data, combining multiple sources. The data sources include the data from Grammy Awards, from the Grammy Academy on who was nominated. That's our first data source, the Grammy Academy itself. The second major data source is the AllMusic online archive that provides a comprehensive list of albums, and therefore also allows to track careers of artists over time and the aesthetic features of their albums. The third main data source is Econest that provided the information about acoustic features of the albums. I will return to that briefly. And the fourth data source is the Billboard charts of popularity of the 200 albums that sold the most copies in the previous week, which we aggregated also at the year level. We made two sets of comparisons. First, we compared winners of Grammy Awards with nominees who did not win the awards. And the second comparison is winners and nominees on the one hand, and everybody else. Now, these comparisons come with a set of assumptions. An important assumption is that winners and nominees are comparable, and there is evidence to think that that's the case. For instance, previous research found that shortlisted candidates for cultural prizes are similar in quality, and I quote unquote quality. For example, the Queen Elizabeth Piano Contest in Belgium shows that order of appearance, which is determined randomly, is actually predictive of who will win the award. And the second assumption is also that the winners and nominees are comparable with the rest of the rest of the artists. This is a more difficult comparison to establish. So in general, nominees and winners tend to be more innovative in the first place. So what we did was to implement a matching process where we matched the winners and nominees with other artists that were more similar in terms of observable features. And we matched these groups with recording histories that were drawn from AllMusic, which, as I mentioned, is arguably the largest online archive of recorded music globally, and also with Billboard 200 charts data. We covered data, as I mentioned, from 1959 to 2018, but the Billboard chart data started in 1966. So the final sample for our analysis covers the period between 1967 and 2018. We compared winners and nominees prior to in an additional test, or a more strict test in comparing winners with nominees, is that we also compared winners with nominees prior to the first nomination for covariates included in the regressions. And none of the tests in comparing winners and nominees indicated that the two groups were significantly different, the winners with the nominees. But we instead saw differences with the other non-nominated artists, which led us to design a match sample using coarse and exact matching to limit the direct comparison to limit the direct comparison to non-nominated artists with similarly differentiated products. And in terms of the matching, the treatment here means an artist receiving a Grammy nomination, and each artist year represents the unit to match. In the matching, we also included the lag-dependent variables to make the different groups as similar as possible. The one important information that we used in the analysis includes information about genres and styles, aesthetic tags and genres. Many of you might be familiar, but they represent aesthetic partitions in music and in other cultural fields. Genres in general refer to the broad context of musical gestures, as musicologists have described. The set of genre categories in the data is small and relatively stable during the study period. Only rap actually appears as a new genre after 1967. Roughly 85% of the albums are associated with a single genre, and the remainder have multiple genres, with less than 0.5% in the data having 5 or more genres. Styles instead represent more specific manners to articulate the musical gestures, and differentiation between artists is based only on genre changes might show too limited variation to analyze systematically. So the main way in which we examined differentiation and innovation in content of music is in terms of differentiation of styles within a broad genre. I'll spend just a little bit of time describing how we examined positions of artists in the musical space, and also the differentiation and the distance of each artist's music from the music made by others. We used a machine learning approach to determine stylistic distance. The measure that we used was implemented in 2 steps. In the first, we used stylistic descriptors and also acoustic parameters taken from that Econest database, which provided essentially values for each song, which were then aggregated at the album level on several parameters like key, tempo, danceability, and so on, to predict the location of an album in the musical space. That's the first step. And then we calculated the distance between all pairs of albums in the same genre in the second step. And I have to say that in the analysis, the acoustic parameters did not add much in terms of explanatory power. So we focused on stylistic distance in the main analysis. The way that these machine learning algorithm processed the data is that it turned the categorical style information into a binary format. For each album, we coded a 1 by 832 sized vector of zeros and ones. 832 is the number. 832 is the number of distinct styles that we found in the data. And then next, we also included a hidden layer of size 832 to capture the interaction between the input variables. The classification layer outputs a 21-dimensional vector, which corresponds to the genres for each album's location in the artistic space. And then we use these coordinates to calculate the pairwise distances of all albums and calculated a simple Euclidean distance between the vectors. With the pairwise album distance measure, we then proceeded to calculate distance between styles. In other words, we use the stylistic descriptors in the data to locate each album in the broader musical space. The location implied calculating a predicted value of the album, a predicted probability of an album being in the genre. And these coordinates were then used to calculate distances between that album and every other album in the same genre, which we then aggregated and averaged across all pairwise distances to determine the average distance of an album from all of the other albums made by other artists in the prior 3 years. The measure that we calculated is scale-free, so the numbers have a meaning, but not a specific, maybe intuitive meaning. The measure also ranges from 0 to about 1.9 with an average of 0.3, which might matter in a couple of slides when I show the main results of the analysis. We make two assumptions, based on the theory that I sketched and the data that I described. We make two assumptions in this argument about exploration or innovation as both an aspiration and an affordance, as I termed them earlier, and about the relationship between awards and material resources. In general, we know that awards increase public attention towards the nominees and clearly, of course, the winners, and are expected to meet greater success in the market. And also awards increase status that then provides better opportunities and possibly greater bargaining power for artists vis-a-vis the cultural producers and the partners that provide resources to them. On the left-hand side of this slide, I report some marginal effects of winning and being nominated for one of the major Grammy Awards on the peak position of the Billboard 200 charts. The position has been reverse coded so that a positive effect means increase in success. And the estimates, like all the other estimates that I'll discuss, are obtained with fixed effects for at the artist level, and also a linear time trend and interaction, genre fixed effects, and also interactions between the genres and the time trend. The fixed effects at the artist level implies essentially that we are controlling for stable differences and heterogeneity across artists. The independent variable in this analysis shown on the left-hand side is a dichotomous variable equal to 1 in the year of nomination or win. What we see in this analysis is that significant increases in sales in the year after a nomination or a win of a Grammy Award. So the Grammy Awards have an impact in terms of visibility and commercial success as well. On the right-hand side of this slide, instead, I show some effects of nomination or win of a Grammy Award on the number of production credits, which we take as a proxy for size of resources used in musical production. In this analysis, we find that only nomination for an award has a significant effect. Both coefficients are positive, but only nomination has a statistically significant effect. The number of average the average number of credits for album production is 11. So here we see an effect of about 4, which seems significant. Our interpretation of the significant effect of nomination but not win is that both nominees and winners have similar resource increases after the award to be used for subsequent production, but perhaps these two groups are using them differently. So this first analysis is more of a way of validating important assumptions in the argument. I show here instead the main results from the analysis in the first study, where we consider how an award can impact the content of cultural products and therefore also the careers of cultural producers. In this slide, the histograms show that winners receive these analyses also represent marginal effects of regressions, again with fixed effects for artist genres and interactions between genres and time, which means that we can interpret them as a change in stylistic distance associated with winning or being nominated for a Grammy. Additional controls here include the tenure of or experience of the artist, record label, whether it's a major record label or not, and prior success of the artist. The main result of the analysis is that a stylistic distance, which is our measure of differentiation and therefore innovation, increases with winning an award. However, it decreases with being nominated without winning. The winning result was what we expected, but the nominee result instead was an unexpected discovery in the analysis, and I might get to that interpretation or that meaning a little bit later. In these results, or on the right hand side of the slide, I provide a couple of examples that might that we can use to exemplify these findings. Christina Aguilera, who won a major Grammy Award as Best New Artist in 2000, she for her eponymous album that clearly positioned her in the teen pop category and trend. With her subsequent, with the next album she made after that eponymous album, which was called Stripped, she incorporated more different stylistic forms, for example, R&B and flamenco and rock. By contrast, Joan Osborne, who was nominated for Best New Artist Award in 1996, for her music that critics described as being honest and unadorned, particularly in the album Relish, she continued making music with albums such as Righteous Love, where the singer herself emoted in a more restrained pop vein that was more similar to the to the contemporaneous trend. The question here is, so the finding that the winners increased their differentiation and innovation was what we expected, but that the nominees who did not win was in part a surprise. And we can conjecture, speculate as to why we see these patterns. The nominees miss part of the prize, so they do receive visibility, but they do not win. So this can reduce motivation and might also induce some negative motivational spillovers. There's some evidence from corporate award study that suggests that where those who did not win and were internally motivated perceive the system as being unequal, for instance, because they were not awarded. It may also be that the nominees engage in counterfactual thinking. This is consistent with what social psychologists term the silver medalist effect, which is about both psychological and behavioral adjustments. These results also hold if we restrict the sample to winners versus nominees between their first and second nomination, if it happened. And in this restricted sample, the effect that we focused on was that we discovered was the positive effect of winning versus just being nominated. And clearly, in these and the other graphs that I'll show in a couple of minutes, the solid color of the histogram indicates statistical significance, and the graded color, which is not in this slide but in the next ones, will indicate non-significant effects. In this case, both effects were significant. So these main analysis perhaps points to a first paradox about the differences between just being nominated and winning, in the sense that there are more nominees that who do not win than winners. And the rest of the field might look at consecrated artists, be they nominated or winning, to imitate. And if they imitate the nominees, the field might actually reduce innovation overall. The second question that we examined looks more closely at how innovation post-award might be obtained. And here we focus on collaboration patterns, the other artists and personnel that the artists work with after receiving an award. The data that we use in this second study are taken from album credits that the artists and the record labels communicate in the liner notes of the albums. We consider that collaboration patterns might change with awards and the associated status shifts of these awards. We expected to see evidence, in particular, of status sorting, where artists who receive recognition will work more with other similarly recognized artists. One of the reasons that they will have more in common, and the similarity of status can also help preserve one position in the social structure, in the social system. The nominees are finalists to an award but did not receive the award. So while they might benefit from additional resource allocation, they might orient also differently in terms of the production. The status similarity or homophily or the high status aspirations will still apply, but given the relatively lower recognition compared to the winners, the prominence of their collaborators might look somewhat different, and particularly lower in terms of prominence as well. We expect that the nominees in particular might pursue less pure work or not negotiate successfully with outside partners. And they might also seek more prominent collaborators, but their offer might not be accepted if the higher status potential collaborators are concerned with their consecrated position as well. So here we estimated a series of models of collaboration patterns associated with Grammy nominations and wins. We measured first the number of star collaborators, as we call them, so collaborators who had won awards prior to the collaboration, and the number of co-star collaborators who had received Grammy nominations but did not win prior to the collaboration. We find some evidence patterns consistent with status homophily, similarity in the collaboration patterns. In particular, Grammy nominees work more with other Grammy-nominated artists, and Grammy winners work more with other Grammy-winning artists. And these effects are statistically significant. Consecrated artists are also expected to pursue more artistic aims, so they should work less, we expected, at least to see them work less with other collaborators that had been more commercially successful, in the sense that commercial success is the second best relative to artistic goals. And this is the case in the analysis that we conducted. Grammy winners work less with more successful others, and nominees instead who did not win the award work more with more successful collaborators. Successful collaborators are measured with prior average position in the Billboard charts of the collaborators. And finally, We also examined a different recognition collaboration link. Collaborations with other of similar status might suggest stability instead of innovation. So thinking about the award exploration relationship, one can wonder how this similarity might actually lead to innovation at all. So we examined whether award winners work more with novel or novice collaborators that correspond to new to the artist and new to the industry collaborators. The idea is that novices typically challenge conventions. So novices are new artists in the field. Novices should challenge conventions that are oriented more towards artistic goals. So there could be a similarity between the award winners and the novices in terms of similarity of their orientation. We measured here number of collaborators who are novel to the artist and novel to the industry. These are also averages for each year, so they can be examined as continuous variables. What we find here is that Grammy winners are working with more novel collaborators and novice collaborators as well, but Grammy nominated artists did not. The nominees' effects are not statistically significant, indicated with the graded histograms. A final thing that we examined as whether working with star collaborators or co-star collaborators and novel collaborators might be substitutes. They are not. These contingency tables where we split the samples with above the mean and below the mean in each of the variables of recognition and novice collaborators indicate that the frequency of work with star collaborators and novel collaborators increase after the awards more for winners than nominees. I'll just conclude the overview of the analysis here by saying that we also ask questions around generalizability, whether this is only an impact that we see for Grammy Awards or more generally. So we examine the Pulitzer Prize in Music as another type of award that is given to music artists, and we actually found similar patterns to the main analysis for the first study, with winners of the Pulitzer Prize engaging in more experimental, more innovative work after the prize, and the nominees instead in less innovative work. One of the questions that we leave to future studies is also the impact of experimentation, this innovation that we find among winners on subsequent reception. What we see so far is that the implication of awards is that the artists, or at least of a first award, like a Grammy, is that the artists who win will engage in more differentiated and more innovative work. But that subsequent work is not necessarily acknowledged in its own right. So we find, for instance, that the subsequent work that previously Grammy-winning artists made is less likely to end up on the list of best music as compiled by influential critics. So this is an interesting, perhaps second paradox that the attention and exploration does not lead to further recognition. I'll conclude here by just summarizing some of the main findings of these two studies, where we do find evidence that awards result in more experimentation in popular music production, and also in specific patterns of collaboration. These essentially awards change the trajectory of music that artists make, and also perhaps the trajectory of the whole field around them, because many artists tend to imitate the artists who are finalists or who win major awards. Rewarding artistry results in more innovation, but innovation does not necessarily lead to subsequent work that is recognized or as much impact as I mentioned in the last slide. This concludes my presentation. I think I went slightly over the time limit. I apologize, but I will stop here and hope to discuss some questions that you may all have.
Great. Thank you, Giacomo. Fascinating. Lots of questions, I'm sure. So if anybody wants to have ask a question, please go ahead and raise your hand or put your question into the chat and I will call you out. I'm going to start, and honestly, a lot of what I've been thinking about, you segued not only with your future work slide, but also in other parts of your presentation. But I guess I kept on thinking about this idea, which you mentioned as future work, of sort of what's the potential impact on demand here. So how does any of this bode for changes in who buys these records, who listens to these artists? And just wondering if you could expand a little bit on your thoughts there of what you're hypothesizing, maybe where your theories come from.
Sure. So maybe to summarize the main findings, we do see that awards have impact on popularity or visibility, let's say in the consumer market, also in the in intermediaries market. This is related but somewhat also distinct from then the impact that the award has on the orientation towards production that the artist develop. So what my idea is that the work that is awarded, that is acknowledged with an award, receives visibility that gives in turn opportunities to the artists to engage in more experimental, less mainstream, more differentiated work. Now, that more differentiated work might not meet the same success, and typically will not meet the same success as the work that has received the acknowledgement by both peers and by implication the consumer market. So I think this is interesting. I called it a paradox. I don't know if it's exactly a paradox, but perhaps is in part unintended as a consequence for production and its reception. It might be, and that's more maybe a way to interpret your question. It seems that the producers might move more quickly than the market in terms of shifting the trajectory of the work that they do.
I'm going to go straight to Mel's question, which is when he sees these words like differentiation and innovation and novel, he expects to next see the word entrepreneur and possibly disruptive. Might this possibly be on your research agenda going forward?
That's interesting. I don't know. I'm not an entrepreneurship scholar, so I don't specifically use that framework or perspective. I think maybe the work that we have been doing has clearly highlighted the collaborative and collective nature of music production. So maybe I'm not familiar enough with the entrepreneurship research, certainly. It seems to me that that type of work often takes a less contextual and maybe more individual-centered perspective in terms of the source of disruption. I think what we're doing here really maybe recenters the discussion more around the collective nature of production, both in terms of alignment of interests and the need for coordination of resources across multiple levels and across multiple agents. So that radius of creativity that I showed earlier on, that's also in this final slide, I think identifies the artist as the core of that radius, maybe akin to an entrepreneur. But then there's a need to expand that radius to understand really how music is made and how innovation in music production is obtained, in the sense that we want to take into account the direct collaborators in the aesthetic choices and in the production choices, but then the other organizational partners that might provide mostly material or financial resources, such as record labels, and then the entire field around them. I think all of them are involved in the making and understanding of innovation.
Hmm.
Perhaps maybe the connection then to entrepreneurship is to invite a more contextual view of the production process.
That's a great answer, and actually segues into another question I had, which is, you take this right in the beginning, you take this definition of innovation, meaning differentiation. I'm wondering if that definition would change if you all of us change the context of this research. So if you did this research on theater productions or dance productions or anything else that's created out of different CCIs or creative and cultural industries?
I mean, I hope that there would be some ideas and also evidence that's applicable beyond music production. I think maybe what comes to mind is also the notion that in cultural production, even the same, let's say, quote unquote, the same content produced in different times actually acquire different meaning. So, and I think that's for me, it's an interesting, perhaps also profound implication of how we interpret the work that Bourdieu has done in the sense that these constant position taking, of an artist relative to others, might shift along different directions and trajectories. And even if, let's say, we end up in a similar place where we were before, that still counts as innovation in the sense that the understanding of what artists do and have done in the past has changed with the body and corpus of products, with the supply of products that have been made in the meantime.
Mm. What also strikes me too, that there is a focus, at least an implicit focus here, that we're looking at individual artists, and the music industry is obviously, you can do that a little bit better than the theater industry where actors are in productions with other actors. I mean, does the initial unit sort of matter to the overall conclusion of this study, the initial unit being the individual artists? Or if you change the conception of the initial unit to be a group of artists, would you necessarily think there would be a different outcome?
I think that's a great question, and I would say both yes and no, and I'll try to quickly articulate why I think that. In the no, I think is in part because a lot of the artists that we examine are actually collectives in the first place. So a lot of the artists here are not necessarily individual artists, maybe groups, and so there's, at least in those smaller groups, a similar structure, or that really looks at the collective as the origin of the innovation. The reason why I think this is, however, the translation perhaps is not that direct or not that obvious, is that we also chose a context in which production is relatively simple. And again, I quote unquote relatively. If you think about major motion picture production, where the creative efforts and the production itself is clearly collective, but also tends to be more complex, with really a very wide range of differentiated inputs, both technical and aesthetic, artistic, that are put together, and they all have to work at a certain level of effectiveness to actually even get to a final product. So I think there's some generalizability beyond the individual act of production, perhaps not complete, because some more complex production efforts might require that we really look into the coordination processes more explicitly.
Yeah. I had a really fun question come in through the private chat, but this idea of how much does the Grammy win change the artist versus emancipate them to find their true self? Right. I keep on thinking about Taylor Swift and how she, initially was a country music artist and is now very much a pop artist. how much do you see that transformation take place of these artists or these collectives?
Yeah. Let me just write down a couple of thoughts
Yeah.
about this. I think this is a great question, and I'll say I do have more of a conjecture to answer it, in the sense that the data are archival secondary data that allow us to study and examine, say, stylistic tags or descriptions of the features of the products, but not really get into the creative process or the generative production process that the artist is involved in. So everything that I'll say is indirectly, I think, and in part, or the fruit of the product of indirect evidence. I will say, and another, I think, complication is that because of this interplay between commercial success and artistic aims after the award, the subsequent production choices are, a little bit difficult to disentangle. The um, the other thing is that I didn't have the time to show additional analysis that we conducted, where we tried to essentially we tried to put together the first study with the second study, right? So the first study asks what leads to innovation, and the second study is, if we see innovation, how exactly or how more precisely, more in detail, is this innovation produced? So one natural question is to think that, say, collaboration patterns, for example, might be a mediating mechanism for the outcomes of greater innovation and greater experimentation that we find in the first study. And I don't know that the type of longitudinal large-scale panel data that we use is very suitable for, say, mediation analysis, strictly intended. But from analysis that we conducted, we see some partial evidence of mediation, but not complete evidence. Actually, the magnitude of the effects of the Grammy win or Grammy nomination are, if not unchanged, they're close to, virtually unchanged, and remain significant, which again suggests, I think, that there's something that changes in the behavior of the artists in terms of people that they work with, and the type of context that they operate in, more opportunities, more leverage that they can gain, for instance, in vis-a-vis their organizational partners like record labels. But there is something also, to your question, fundamentally, that changes in the orientation, individual or collective, of the artists themselves, orientation towards the work. And towards the practice and towards music production. So I think it's both. It's the context adjusts to the impact of the award, but the artist as well, psychologically approaches the work differently. And it could be a sense of, being freed from constraints, emboldenment, or curiosity that finally can be actualized.
Yeah, this is great, because I think this work brings up the variety of angles you could look at the question from. So you obviously, I think, at least for me, the work you presented today is looking at this from a market perspective of what's the outcome, what's the creative production. But you could look at this in terms of the process for the producer as well as the consumption of the product. And so I like being able to see all of these different angles and already hear suggestions about what the hypotheses and theories would be about the conclusion. So very nice to hear from you, Giacomo. Thank you so much for this really insightful presentation.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. Yes, thank you also for all the great questions.
It's my pleasure, and great to have everybody here on the presentation. This is our last workshop for this semester, and we will be coming back next January with another 6 workshop presentations, which we're in the process of scheduling now. So keep an eye on your inboxes, like I'm sure everyone does every day. And otherwise, happy holidays and have a great break to all of those who get one. So thank you.
Thank you.